for the state, for the powerful, there is a lot of value in being able to monitor people, specifically people that are that you want to be good members of a capitalist society and good soldiers. There is of course value in that for them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, well, I mean, one of the things, when Edward Snowden came out with his revelations and some of the other ones that basically let us know that the NSA is looking at our phone calls and looking at our email, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, a lot of people responded to that. And I think, over, upper middle class white people in particular saying, why are you gathering data on me? I haven't done anything. Go after those people over there. But those people over there are the same people that are impacted by mass incarceration, by mass criminalization, who get arrested for sleeping in public, or for urinating on a tree or something, and end up in this cycle of incarceration. But those are the same people that are criminalized by this surveillance technology, by these technologies of e-carceration. And the state wants to keep an eye on those people, to control those people, as you point out, wants to punish them. And this technology becomes a technology of punishment and control.
So there is, and you write about this too, but there is likely a, let me put it this way. I've been very skeptical of groups like Koch Industries or the Koch brothers, and their odd push to cut back on mass incarceration. Part of that is because they want to cut costs so that taxes can be slashed even further, of course. But to me, there is there seems to be a push for not the abolition of the prison industrial complex, but surveillance capitalism and electronic surveillance as a replacement. Is that something that you've observed and that you have fears about?
Well, yes. I mean, that's really what triggered me to do all the research, to go around and interview people that have been on electronic monitoring, to try to counter the notion that electronic monitors represent an alternative to incarceration. In the same way that other kinds of more punitive alternatives like drug courts and mental health courts and so forth, that are really infused with this notion of punishment, what we call the punishment paradigm. So electronic monitoring, we refer to it, I mean, I work for an organization called Media Justice, and we've had a campaign called Challenging E-Carceration for several years. And part of what we try to push out on that is, number one, to change the narrative that electronic monitoring is not an alternative to incarceration, but it's an alternative form of incarceration. And secondly, that, as we've already mentioned in this discussion, that it is part of the surveillance state, or as you put it, the global surveillance state, or the global use of this technology. And that's one of the things I try to emphasize in the book, to connect the dots between what happens on people's ankle. So in the book, I'm moving from people's ankle outward for the to look at the way the technology is used in immigration, the way it's used, let's say, for example, in Gaza against Palestinians, and
Right.
so forth. So I want us to understand that, it's not just an ankle shackle, and I don't call it bracelet because it's not jewelry. I mean, that's another thing that we do, is we normalize this by coming up with neutral, even positive terms for them, but that's not what they are.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about Palestine and zoom out with you. But another piece that I think is a bit dystopian and scares people about this expanding surveillance state is the usage of facial recognition. And there are, of course, racial biases in that. Can you talk a little bit about your research in that area and what you found?
Well, I think, facial recognition there's been so many studies of it to show basically that it can't recognize Black people. It can't identify. It claims to be able to, that is neutral, that is not biased, like all of these technologies do. That's part of their selling point, is it's technology. It doesn't have bias. Humans have bias. Technology doesn't. So somehow we're supposed to accept that myth. So, but we know that in Oprah Winfrey gets identified as a man in facial recognition technology. I mean, there's all these instances where people they just can't be identified. And it's black women who kind of ironically, given the punitive nature of the system, it's black women who are most likely to be misidentified by this technology. So, but yet it just keeps spreading, and without people having accountability. Now, there have been some initiatives, like in San Francisco, they've banned the use of it by local government, and there's other initiatives in Massachusetts and so forth, because with some of these technologies, there is no positive use for them. There is, we talk about reforming and changing them. There is no positive use for facial recognition technology that I can see.
Yeah, except, I mean, then you'll have people in government or potentially companies that have quite lucrative contracts in order to provide this technology basically say, well, play out life as if it's a 24 episode. You got a terrorist with a bomb and you've got 24. I mean, that's when we need these technologies, but that's not what they're used for. It's just obviously not what they're used for, especially because that situation might happen once in a decade or a blue moon, if at all.
Right. Also, and I mean, it's not as if people who might be targeted like that aren't going to figure out that maybe they should put a plastic nose on or something and
Yeah.
distort their face. I mean, it's just like a license plate readers is another technology like that. People, I mean, I live in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. We just had a big battle with city councils over license plate readers and trying to show that it's easy enough to misidentify a license plate number. If people are going to actually do violent crime, they're quite likely to go out and steal somebody else's license plate and put that on their car. So there's instances where people get pulled over and get rousted as if they're bank robbers or something, when all they are is the victim of a license plate switch. So these technologies are just not what they're cracked up to be, but there's no sense of making these companies accountable.
Right. Well, it's for the powerful. There's no downside for them. These companies are making a lot of money off of contracts with the government, and the government is expanding its power, which is bipartisan. That's one of the bipartisan parts of our government. And before we move on to the more global implications of this, something occurred to me because you talked a little bit about how there's this sanitizing language of an ankle bracelet as opposed to an ankle cuff, but the whole technology as incarceration is in and of itself sanitizing, because there's, like you said before, there's a sense that, oh, if it's a technology, then it can't have racial biases. It's just it's almost religious in the way that people approach it. There is a sense that it's omnipotent and fair, and it I feel like it does sanitize the entire experience of incarceration and of surveillance in and of itself.
Oh, yes, for sure. And I think so. The way we've tried to push back against that, because there's so little data, the data we have is the lived experience of people who have been on these monitors, who have had a loved one on the monitor, who have tried to run some kind of community-based programs with people who are on the monitor. And the lived experience of people is very different than what the salespeople or the state put forward about this technology, let alone what the sort of gurus of technology, or big tech as some people refer to them, who present technology as the savior, that technology is going to save us, and that's technology being accepted uncritically according to the mythology put forward by the companies that sell this. But I think it's really important to stress that, and I think you've been bringing this out in the way a lot of journalists and even some activists don't do, and that is, it's not the companies that drive this. The companies make profit out of it, but it takes state actors. It takes public elected officials and decision makers to take that decision to provide resources for the people that are using these technology to make these contracts. So BI, the largest electronic monitoring company in the US, has they have a monopoly on the technology that they put on electronic monitors that they put on immigrants. Well, they didn't get that. They didn't get that by themselves. They had to get that by going through the Department of Homeland Security and through Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So people in decision-making positions are taking the decision, just like they did with building prisons and jails, that this is going to be helpful to somebody, and this is going to solve the problem. And we know it hasn't solved any of the problems it was supposed to solve.